you reached out and somebody else reached out. I had done a video with my good friend Gavin Stone, reading body language of someone who I guess was colloquially called a flat earther, who went down to Antarctica and had to acknowledge that they, there was a 24-hour sunlight or daylight situation.
Sun, actually. Yeah, not just light. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, the sun stayed in the sky the whole time. Nobody could say that. Well, how's that possible? And apparently, that will wreck the flat Earth model, something of which I've never really studied or understood. And you also were on this trip.
Yes. So I can explain briefly. Here is the map that they generally have had for the last 150 years. And they say the sun does circles around the North Pole, which is in the center. And so if you go to the perimeter, then you could look toward the center to see the sun, but you could never look away from the center to see the sun.
Okay,
so that was our test.
Well, one question about using that map, because I'm not that bright, but I was like, okay, so how could you circumnavigate from east to west or west to east and ultimately hit the same countries? Wouldn't you drop off the edge?
Well, they say they have some excuses for that. They talk about the way that compasses point, and they say, well, compasses will always point to the middle, and it's not a great answer, but for people that don't understand navigation deeply, it works enough to convince them. So
okay, so it's like the old Pac-Man video game where you go out one side of the screen and come in the other side. I don't
know.
I don't know.
There are some flat earthers that have that type of an idea, and so they don't use that particular map. But this particular map, they say if you're going to go east, that you're going to unknowingly be going in a circle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but yeah, there are some that have like a rectangular map, and you go off one side and you Pac-Man over to the other side. Not very many, and they're even amongst other flat earthers, they're kind of laughed at.
Okay, well, and the thing is, I don't want to mock anyone, per se. I do not believe in the flat Earth thing. It doesn't seem to make sense. I feel like that was something that has been resolved for a long time. I had mentioned Galileo. That popped in my head. I'm not an expert, though. Maybe people were saying it was round before him, or spherical before him, or whatever else. So
yeah.
But that's always been my belief, and I'm going to go ahead and land with I think that it's a globe. It seems like a globe. Every time I'm in the air, I sort of see a rounding on the horizon. If I'm high enough in the sky, it just
there's a crisp horizon, which if the Earth were flat, it'd just be a blur. And ancient people thought the Earth was flat, but they also thought that the sun went underneath the Earth at night, and everybody had nighttime simultaneously. That was figured out centuries ago, millennia ago, that wasn't the case. And so then it fell into, people didn't accept flat Earth then until the mid 1800s, when one guy came along and kind of preyed on people's ignorance and misunderstanding of geometry and said, well, the sun gets so far away that it sets, but that it doesn't make geometrical sense. But they didn't get it, and so that's kind of
So is the moon flat and Mars and the other planets?
They don't really have any answers. They have a lot of disagreements. Some say it's flat, some say it's concave, some say it's plasma, which doesn't solve the problem. Some say it's just a projection onto what, from what, where does it project? They just have these kind of vague ideas, and they're uncurious enough that they're like, oh, that's good enough for me. Not good enough for normal people. Like, well, that doesn't really make sense if you think about it one step deeper. But that's where they are.
Okay. Well, again, I saw from the comment section that I accidentally stirred something up. I did not realize that would happen. It's like, okay, it's kind of a one-off thing.
They're very vocal.
Well, I have a general rule, and this is not just flat earthers. It's just about the comment section. And it goes something like this. What commenters lack in knowledge, they make up for in certainty.
That's very true.
So, okay. So I wanted to get you on. Tell me what went down. Tell me, what was this whole trip, the planning, how you got involved? What
so, almost a year ago, some videos started coming out from a mysterious new channel talking about the final experiment and saying, well, people that think the Earth is a globe and flat earthers have disagreed, but they've all said similar things, that if you go to Antarctica, if the sun circles 24 hours a day, then it cannot be flat. And so there was a lot of agreement amongst the flat earth crowd on that. And there's lots of times that they've made their, made their commitment to that. It's not possible. And so the guy that put it together was eventually like announced himself as Will Duffy, a guy that's got a lot of money, became independently wealthy, and is a pastor and doesn't take money from the church. This is from previous, so he's a volunteer pastor, and so he's like, well, I want to settle this. It was near to his heart because a lot of flat earthers say they go to the Bible and say, well, the Bible says this, and so that's it makes Christians look bad. It makes people that look at the Bible as their holy book look bad. And so he said, well, I don't want that anymore. And so I'm going to do something about it. And he had the facilities to do it. So he said, I'll pay for a flat earther and a normal person to go there and with him and see what happens. In the end, 9 of us went. Some got paid by Will, some got paid through other means. I crowdfunded myself. And so through the generosity of my viewers, I was able to go as well. So
Now, how did you go? Did you charter a plane that could carry all of you, or what happened?
So this is a normal, everyday tourist excursion through a company called Antarctic Logistics and Expeditions, ALE. They offer pre-done tours. You go there and you stay at, essentially it's a hotel in Antarctica. You stay in a tent, 2 people per tent, and or they can cater for you any particular thing. They're a logistics company. So if you want to do a solo trek across Antarctica on skis or on a snowmobile or in a truck, you could go to them and say, I want to do that. Can you help us do the logistics? And they'll help you do the logistics. So we just used one of their regular offerings that they're doing again this year, December 14 to 18. You get yourself to Punta Arenas at the southern tip of Chile. And then you get on a plane that they charter through Icelandic Air. You fly to Union Glacier, which is very far inland. It's about 80 degrees south latitude. So we flew over hundreds or thousands, not certain, miles of Antarctica from the edge of where the water is. There's no ice wall, by the way, all the way to Union Glacier, and landed on an ice runway on a regular old 757 airplane. So it was everything felt normal until we're like, okay, we're about to land.
Yeah, that'd be just kind of spooky if you've ever driven on ice. I mean,
yes,
I take it they're highly trained pilots.
Yeah, I live in Minnesota, so yes, I'm driving on ice is crazy. Landing on ice is frightening. So they don't use the brakes on the tires; they just use the engine brakes. So yeah,
okay, so
and
is it a very long quote runway that they're doing? Are they making up for it with distance, like to just kind of touch down and there's nothing else out there? So they're like, hell with it. Wherever it stops.
There's no airport. So yeah, it's a 3-kilometer long runway. It's a naturally formed section of ice. So it's on the glacier. It's right next to where it's super windy. So the wind blows any loose snow or ice off of it. So it's just mostly bare ice. And mostly what they do to prep it is they go over it and they brush off the snow and it blows away.
Wow. Okay.
So it is the most interesting part of it. Really, because you're landing on ice and it's crazy. I have on my channel, Conspiracy Tunes, a real-time video of the landing out the window. So from
can we insert that on this video?
Sure. It's awesome. Yeah, go ahead. I can even give you the original. So and I have a time lapse of the entire flight from when we were on the ground in Chile to walking out of the plane in Antarctica. So that's how we got there. Then
how long was it? 4 hour, 5 hours?
Little over 4 hours total
Okay, so
time.
about like East Coast to West Coast
Yep.
here.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Then we got off the plane, and it was super windy there, and we get into we were all bundled up in our polar gear.
It had to be cold as hell.
Well, it wasn't. I'll get into that.
Oh, okay.
Um, it was very windy, so the wind cuts through quickly.
Hmm.
But we get into the vehicle. They have people carrier vehicles that are high up off the ground, and they're big, and their seats are large, and you sit in the back. You have to walk up steps to get into it, and um, uh, some of them have basically 4 snowmobile tracks. Some have just giant tires. And so we took that road to camp, which is a couple kilometers away, where it's surrounded by mountains, and so it was not windy at all there. We got out of
Oh.
it, got out of the vehicle, and we'd been sitting in there with everything bundled up in this pretty warm vehicle, and we're just sweating.
Mm.
And then we get out there, and it was over 20 degrees Fahrenheit.
Really? And you're from
So
Minnesota, so it's probably
that was pretty comfortable.
yeah.
And we had our boots on, we had our long johns and our snow pants and everything on. Like we were warm. So right away we're all just taking off stuff because we're just cooking. And so we were walking around there, no wind, mid-20s, warm on the bottom, and some of us were just wearing t-shirts or just a sweatshirt on top.
Wow. Now is this because it's a height of summer?
It is the height of summer, yes. So this is December 14. The peak of summer, or summer really begins December 21st.
Oh, that's right. So yeah, it'd be
It's yeah,
height of spring, I guess.
it's the solstice, but it's not quite like in the temperate zones. It's not driven by so much of surrounding water temperatures and other
Oh, okay.
climate things. You're like, it's the sun, and that's it. So the warmest time really is December 21st, maybe a little bit after. In Minnesota here, the beginning of summer is the beginning of when it's warm. It's warmest in August sometimes.
Mm, that
A
makes
couple
sense.
months later, there's that delay. You don't quite have that there. The weather patterns are different. So anyway, we were warm. We were running around, threw the frisbee around a little bit, um, and it was unusually warm even. And the people there were like, "Man, we've had some pretty rough weather lately," and it cleared up just in time for you to get here. So it's
Well,
pretty
that was
cool.
good news because otherwise it'd be hard to prove the sun if there was clouds everywhere.
Yeah, certainly. And we had a full almost 48 hours of clear skies.
Now, question on that, because this came up a lot in the comments, so you can probably answer it now. People are like, nobody could see any breath, so they're lying. There's no fogging of the breath. Is that because it was warmer or just what?
There's a couple factors. Number one, probably these people don't live in cold weather areas, because like if you're in the house and you walk outside, you'll see your breath for a bit. But
Mhm.
once you're outside, your lungs dry out, your lungs cool down, and so you don't have that anymore. So after you've been out doing something for a while, even if it's 10 degrees or
Mhm.
colder, you don't even see that in cold weather. But also the humidity plays a big factor. The reason why you see your breath is because the dew point gets above a certain
Good point.
amount, and so when you see your breath, it's particles of water that are not gaseous anymore, so they condense into liquid or even ice instantly, or very quickly, and that's why you see it. But if the humidity is low enough, which it is there, it will stay in gaseous form, and so that's the other thing. But there are
That makes
many.
sense. That makes sense. I'm from Tucson, Arizona, in the desert, and I also lived in Fort Irwin. And when you talked about, the hottest point is that day, well, it sounded like the desert to me.
It is a
The hottest
desert.
point is when the sun is there. There's no humidity, so it's direct sun warmth or none.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it is a desert. It's called the largest desert on the earth. It rarely precipitates there. So all of we called it snow, but it's not really snow. It's just tiny ice particles. So all of that has been there for centuries and will remain there for centuries. When it does precipitate, it stays. It's got nowhere to go. It doesn't melt. So Anyway, yeah, there are many instances on video where you do see our breaths. It depends also on sunlight. So if the sun's shining directly on you, if there is condensation, you don't see it. There are times where I was wearing a dark shirt and you could see in front of my shirt where there was condensation, but off over my shoulder, you don't see it because there's, something lighter behind me. So many instances where you did see it. So um, those people who said that didn't watch much of the footage.
Okay. Now, I want to be sympathetic, especially, the people who went there and had their mind changed. That's something I really appreciate on my channel is the concept of being open-minded and to shift and interpret new information. And I want to put it, I actually think it was kind of brave of them to do this and to also come out and say, yeah, it's this. I can't explain it, but yeah, it's that. And I'm wondering if you've continued to communicate with anybody there because I have a feeling they might be having a hard time of it.
Well, the main one that you probably are thinking of is Jaron Campanella, because he's the one that came on and said, sometimes in life you're wrong and you gotta, basically admit you're wrong. And he did that, and he's been absolutely fantastic. Um, I talk to him regularly. He instantly got attacked by his former community, got ostracized aggressively, and pretty quickly he said, "I'm no longer a flat earther." He was number one fed up with the way they treated him, and number two, he's like, it doesn't make sense. The map that flat earthers have been saying for 150 years doesn't work, and so when faced with contradictory evidence, the honest thing to do is say, well, we need to, toss that out. And he said, he's like, well, if there's another explanation, he really wants it. But nobody had another explanation. And so he's like, well, he can't be dishonest on that front. And so he threw it out. So he hasn't at this point said much more than that, but I suspect there's something eventually he'll make another bold statement of some sort.
Well, and I want to reach out to Jared specifically, and I did in the video before. I would love to have you on. I'd love to talk to you. I I definitely want to hear this, and I'm not saying this is an analogy, but as an example, one of the people I interviewed was the head of the American Nazi Party, if you will. And he now works with many Israeli groups and helps people to not learn hate. Now, again, I'm not saying it's an analogy analogous. I'm just saying that there are people who have an opinion and it's very controversial, and they change their minds. And I think that's an incredibly brave and good thing to do. But I love to learn from people like, how did you form your original conclusion? I think everybody can learn from that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I think Jaron has done good stuff since then. The others I have not talked to as much, so I can't speak much to
One
them.
reached out to me and offered to come on, but I replied and nothing has come out of it.
Okay.
So I don't know. I don't know what'll happen. And again, I definitely want to hear from anyone and everyone.
Yeah.
Now, to wrap things up on this one, I always like to ask, what's the one question that I should have asked you, but I neglected to?
Uh, I, I don't know. I'm not the one that was having in the end my position challenged. So maybe there's a lot of focus on the one experiment, the big experiment, but we did more. So maybe you could ask about the many other
Tell me.
experiments we did. So I listed out 16 different experiments that we were going to try to do. A couple of them, it just didn't work. Like we were trying to do some sighting of the stars for celestial navigation. It was too cloudy when we were in South America for that. But we did measure the length of line of longitude. So on the globe, the longest line of between lines of longitude is at the equator. And everywhere north and south, it shrinks, eventually coming to zero at the two poles. And on the flat Earth map, at least the one that they've used for 150 years, that continues to get wider and wider. So when you're at 53 degrees south, like I was in southern Chile, it needs to be more than it is at the equator. And when you're at 80 degrees south at in Antarctica, it needs to be much more. So we chose 2 points, got their latitude, longitude from GPS, which we know works because people, while we were on the trip in South America, used Uber to get around. That uses GPS. So you can't question that.
There's a lot of contradictions that I can see hard, to try to support that flat
Well,
Earth.
yeah.
I just off the top of my head, and like you said with the Uber, it's like I don't understand how you can acknowledge even the camera technology and the internet usage to transfer your message and the advancement of that.
Yeah.
But holding on, it's confusing to me. I
We
apologize.
were the big irony, of course, the flat earthers used Starlink satellites orbiting the globe to live stream to YouTube and Facebook while they were there.
Okay.
The the irony was lost on them. Anyway, so we measured the length of the line of longitude by getting these 2 points. Then simply extrapolated how long the rest of the longitude are at that particular latitude all the way around the Earth, either the circle or the globe, how long that would be. And of course, it matched the globe to nobody's surprise. Um, so that was one that I particularly liked. And there's been a lot of like moving of the goalposts since then.
Mhm.
They're like, well, all of the things that they said about the sun doing things in Antarctica, they've ditched. The ones others have claimed that it was all faked, which is ridiculous. Anybody can just go there. It's a trip you can book yourself and go. And so I've offered, I'll bring you, I'll escort you there. I'll pay for you to go. But if the sun circles, then you pay me back, and the other way
Uh,
around. If the sun sets, I'll pay you. Right? No loss if you're right. Nobody's been confident enough to take me up on that though. Tells a lot.
yeah, it does. And if you had faked it, and you did the time lapse and everything, did you have GPS tracking you turned on by chance? Because that, I guess that would have been the one little oversight. Is like if you had Strava or some sort of exercise program or something turned on, and while you're recording, you time synced it with the film that these are your GPS coordinates while you were filming. I don't know if you guys did that, but I guess that would have helped.
We did better than that actually. We brought with us GPS trackers for each of us individually. So when we were in Punta Arenas, we all received these GPS trackers, and so they called into the main, you know, through satellite. They reported satellites orbiting the globe, ironically. Um, there are locations, and so when we were in at our camp in Union Glacier, and then to do what we did viewing the sun, we were at a little bit farther um, away from camp because the camp is near a mountain, and there was concern that the shadow of the mountain might hit the camp. So if we stayed at the camp, we might be in shadow. In the end, we were not, but we didn't know for exactly where it would be and where the shadow would. So we were at there was a marathon the day before we got there, and so they had this. It was the the station at the midpoint of the marathon. So it was called halfway point. So we were at halfway point of the marathon at this thing they set up, and they just left set up for us. So very
Okay,
nice of
cool.
them.
All right. Well, I guess there's a certain point that you can't. You just have to say, okay, well, go ahead and think what you want, and and move on now. All right. So we didn't have a specific question. I'll go ahead with this as my last question. What surprised you the most?
Well, not much, really. I know that they're going to move the goalposts. I know that they're going to reject evidence. That's what they do. their specialty. They really excel in rejecting evidence and moving goalposts. So it did not come as a surprise to me at all for that.
But I mean, about the environment, like you mentioned the landing, that I mean, that was a a neat thing. But there might have been something there that you expected one thing, another. The temperature, you mentioned that you were actually kind of hot. I'm sure that might have surprised you. Was there anything else like that that is kind of like, wow, I never really thought of this, and because I'm here, this is really
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, so I live in Minnesota. I don't like fishing, but I have gone ice fishing. And so I know what it's like to stand out on ice for hours. And I find it miserable. I don't like ice fishing. I have friends and relatives that just love it. They can't get enough of it. So standing out on ice is not something I like to do. But when I was envisioning the trip, I'm like, well, that's what we're going to do. And when they said we're going to have you be at a temporary building out at some remote spot away from main camp, I thought, oh, it's going to be some sort of a little shed. And they're like, well, there'll be bathrooms there. And I thought, oh, so it'll be like a bucket. I don't know. Um, but in the end, what surprised me that was how incredibly nice it was there. It is ALE it's a resort, it's a hotel. You check into your room, you check out of your room. They're like, you need to be out by this time. Then, people come by, clean the room. It's a tent. It's a really nice tent, but they clean it up. They put up, redo the cots and put towels out and stuff. And yeah, they have showers there. The bathrooms are not terrible. It's not a bucket. It's a building that's on skis, and so it's a sleigh, and they bring it around different places. At the main camp, they have a lot of bathrooms. They have showers. They melt the ice or the snow. We call it snow, but it's ice crystals for the water. They heat it up. You put it in a bucket. If it's too hot, you put more ice in it to cool it down. The food there was amazing. That was really something. Like you're at this remote spot, and the food was first class. It was just really, really good food. And I know, I gotta imagine that other spots, research stations and stuff like that, especially the smaller ones, you get what you get. But this was pretty nice stuff, food. So
And Starlink worked well.
that was super fast. We didn't know.
Wow.
And so Will purchased a maritime Starlink unit, purchased a rather large data bundle. He spent a good amount of money on that, and we were able to do 2 live streams simultaneously. We never pushed it to see where it would fall apart, but yeah, we did 2 YouTube live streams at the same time, and other people doing stuff simultaneously, sending messages and voice chatting and stuff like that. So um, some of the people were on Discord chatting the whole time almost.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
Okay, how much is the cost? When we're talking about this tourist package, how much would it cost somebody to do this themselves?
Yeah. So the package price to ALE is $32,000. So not a small amount of money, but when you consider the logistics, it's a plane ride to a spot where there's no airport. So the plane goes down and then flies right back. And they have to bring everything there. So every vehicle they bring there in the spring, every building they bring there in spring, and everything they bring out at the end of the season. So there's that. And then you need to get yourself to Punta Arenas. You need to stay in a hotel. You need to eat. You need to have emergency evacuation insurance. So that's another $3,000 to $4,000 on top of that. Oh, you need cold weather gear.
So 50,000 would be not unheard of.
Less than 40.
Less than 40.
Absolute
Okay.
less than 40. I think probably some did it for 36, 35.
And out of curiosity, you can't just go by yourself. You have to have, I'm guessing, a minimum number of people doing it for them to actually make the trip, or will
It's
they
a
just
it's a
take it by you on
it's a
your own?
standard package that they offer every year. And so they fly the plane down for reasons, right? So they're like, well, the day before we went there was a marathon, as I said. And so there was about 70 people that did the marathon. The marathon
They pay
is,
that much money each?
yeah, they paid 22,000 each because it's 2 nights instead of 4 nights.
Okay.
And they know there's a larger demand. So I think they get a little economy of scale there. So They paid $22,000 to run a marathon, and there
Well,
were
I've run
70
them
of them.
before, but I would never pay that.
There were 70 of them. So do the math on that, and you're like, okay, we get the kind of budget they're dealing with. And so that plane had to go down to pick them up and come back. So we rode the plane down that was already going to go down. There were 11 of us that bought this particular package. 9 in our group and 2 others. So the 2 others, they were both independent. And we met one of them and spent some time talking with him. He went on his own. So any one person can purchase this trip. You can, I mean, if you Google Antarctic logistics and expeditions, you'll find it. You can just purchase it. They call it Antarctic Odyssey. That's right there on their website. And I didn't have to do any interacting with the different things that the Antarctic Treaty requires. They handled all that, but it's not a whole lot. It's basically you need to tell the other signatories of the treaty, these people are going. That's it.
Right? Do you need a passport and all that stuff?
I needed a passport to get to Chile.
Oh,
But
that's
once
true.
I was in Chile, no more. There's no
Okay.
passport control in Antarctica. It's not an official country. It's in whatever the treaty says it is. It's not a country. There's no country that has claim to it. So
Yeah, I guess it'd be like almost like maritime situation. Nobody really owns it.
yep. So I don't have a stamp from Antarctica in there because there is no stamp. There is like
Huh.
in their library, they have it a library there. They bring these books back and forth every year. They had like a stamp that you could do yourself on your own passport, but it's not legal or anything. It's just what they do. So I have a Chile in and out stamp, and that's it. Now, if you fly to Antarctica and then exit through another country, well, your last country was Chile, and you're going to land in New Zealand, maybe.
Just a really long flight.
Then you'd get a stamp there. So the marathon people, there is a 7 marathons, 7 continents in 7 days package that the same organizers do. So the first marathon is in Antarctica. It wasn't this particular one. It was later in the season. And so you run the marathon, get on a plane and land in, I don't know where, maybe New Zealand or Australia, and run a marathon there the next day. And then go somewhere else.
Asia, I'm guessing. And then Africa. I'm trying to think of, because you wouldn't want to have too long of a flight so they can actually rest between. But anyway, that sounds completely bonkers.
And it's certainly very costly. But anyway, in that instance, you land in another country other than where you departed from. So there you do go through passport control.
So technically, all the people who are saying it never happened, you have no proof you were there. You don't have a passport.
Well, other than the massive amount of video we took and the live streams we did when we were there and the witnesses, and there's a lot.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you so much. This has really been enlightening, and I don't know if I look forward to the comments, but it should be fun. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks a lot.